Okay, so Grant and Janelle, I think we'll get started. What do you guys think? Janelle and Grant are nodding. Excellent. We still have people joining, but for those of you who were here, let's get started. Very good to see so many people join us today. We're already above 80 attendees. For those of you I don't know or haven't met yet, my name is Alex Gill. I'm the Executive Director of the Ontario Environment Industry Association. And together with Janelle, who's on the call, we're the staff team behind ONEIA. I want to welcome everybody to this session today. This is going to be one of three sessions we're offering, one a week for the next couple of weeks in the area of excess soil management. I'm going to turn over to Grant in just a second, but just a little bit of housekeeping and a quick intro to ONEIA. We've been around for almost 30 years. This is our 29th year. And ONEIA is a collaborative of companies that work in the commercial side of the environment. So we're a pretty big tent. So that includes companies that work in brownfields and excess soil, to companies that develop new water filtration, environmental consulting firms, alternative energy, waste recycling companies. The thing that they all have in common is that they're in the commercial side of providing an environmental solution. And we're going to talk very much about that in the presentations over the next 3 weeks. The other thing you need to know about ONEIA is that we do work by helping people and companies come together to deal with common issues. And I want to say a profound thank you to Grant and the other members of the teams that have been working on the practices documents that we're going to be introducing today and over the next couple of weeks. The work that got us to this point started well before the summer, and it involved volunteering, collaboration, and a lot of on the ground work, not just by the volunteer members of ONEIA, but by Janelle in the office supporting what's going on. I want to say thank you, and a lot of work's gone into doing this. I will note, as Janelle's noted in the chat window, that today's presentation is being recorded, because even though we now have 85 people who joined us, there are people who would probably want to join but can't, so we will be making it available after the fact as a recording. I just wanted to flag that for everybody today. So with no further ado, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to turn the floor over to Grant. Grant?
Thanks, Alex. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you for your attendance today. This is continues to be a hot topic in Ontario, the new on-site excess soil management regulation. ONEIA was requested by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks to develop best practices around the new regulation. And today is one of the three that we've been working on, and it's the ones on haulers. The resources were developed and now posted on ONEIA's website. They may be updated slightly because we have to check against the new amendments that came out just before Christmas. But the best practices documents, the version that we're working from right now, as well as Prezi training materials that Janelle did a great job on developing, are posted on our website. Hopefully you can access those for your viewing pleasure. So just a little bit of context. I think we're all aware of what's gone on, but if you haven't been aware of because you've been consumed with other things like COVID maybe, or United States politics, Regulation 40619 for the on-site excess soil management was a long collaborative effort that the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks embarked on a number of years ago, and has worked very, very hard through consultation with many stakeholders in the province, and has done an excellent job on creating this new regulation and the package that goes around it. So it was announced in December of 2019, and amendments were passed in June 2020, and most recently in December of last year. If you're not aware, the purpose of the regulation was to reduce soil management costs through costs of transportation and making things easier to reuse soil, but also on reducing costs through unnecessary landfilling of excess soil that has quality that would be generally non-impacted or marginally impacted, but could be reused for beneficial reuses. Other purposes are obviously to protect human health and the environment, and that's through eliminating illegal dumping of excess soil, reducing the amount of clean soil that goes to landfill, as I mentioned earlier, but also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The regulatory documents, 40619 is obviously is a regulation that's required by law, but does exempt low-risk soil management activities from waste environmental compliance approvals and the requirements around that. It's going to be implemented with the first phase has already started as of January 1st of this year, and will be implemented in phases up to January 1st of 2025 with some grandfathering provisions. The rules document outlines further details and more of the fine details of things that need to be done and the rules that go around those, such as the assessments of the soil itself, tracking, quality standards, and the reuse rules. That's also required by law because it's included by reference in Reg 40619. Ministry of Environment is developing a series of, I think, 10 fact sheets, and they're still in development. I know that the ministry was working hard to get those released before January 1st, and haven't heard recently on where they are with that process, but my understanding is they are coming very soon. The best practices, such as this one, were developed by industry stakeholders, and the three that we've been working on, although we led the efforts, it was really an industry stakeholder product through full consultation and agreement of those stakeholders. And I will list the stakeholders that worked on this one at the end of our presentation today. The best practices are recommended. They're not rules of law, but as I said, are and were developed by stakeholders in the industry of Ontario for use by the industry. It does outline, the best practices document does outline the regulatory requirements, and then identifies and clarifies how stakeholders can best implement the requirements. They're not always universally applicable, so these best practices may not fit for every situation, but stakeholders are encouraged to review and integrate these best practices where it is useful. Additional best practices that ONEIA has worked on covers the topics such as temporary sites and qualified persons, and we'll be presenting on those, as Alex mentioned earlier, in the next 2 weeks. OSPI is also developing a best practice for reusing excess soil at pits and quarries. As well, the municipal bylaw tool that was originally developed by Canadian Urban Institute is being updated again for this year, and it should be close to being ready as well. So what does Regulation 406 apply? We know that soil is unconsolidated, naturally occurring minimal particles, and that's been well defined. Just to be clear, unless you follow the rules and regulations of Regulation 406, the excess soil will be designated as a waste and regulated under Reg 347, unless all the conditions within the regulation and the rules are followed as outlined briefly below. Excess soil is soil that will be removed from the site for another reuse or deposit on another facility. It can be either dry or liquid, provided that it meets that it's being beneficially reused and not stockpiled for endless eternity. If it's dry and the quality and quantity align with the necessity of beneficial reuse, or if the soil is not dry, the site that's going to use it has a local instrument permitting the deposit of the liquid soil. And there's only a few of those in the province. The reuse site must consent in writing to take the soil so that it's not illegally dumped. In general, soil staying in the project area is not waste if it's being reused on that site. So any of those, in general, those rules, if they're not followed, then the soil would be deemed a waste. Within these rules, you do not need an ECA to deal with the management of the soil, but are subject to the rules and the regulations of Reg 406. Who are the stakeholders in the hauling activities of excess soil? The project leaders are the people at the source site who are responsible for selecting the deposit sites, providing information for the hauling record, and contingency plans for the soil. Qualified person may be the contact person listed on the hauling record about the soil quality and can support selection of the deposit sites. The haulers themselves are responsible for hauling safely and making sure that the hauling record is fully filled out and is with the soil from the project area to the deposit site. Hauling management companies need to ensure that the proper training on the regulation and the hauling and support the collection of the hauling record info. The deposit site provides the hauling record details for complete the loop on the hauling record, as well as maintaining safe sites. And they may also have a qualified person involved at that end. Regulatory requirements for hauling that transport the excess soil for both dry are focused around safe containment and transport, as well as ensuring that the hauling record information is always complete. That can be done verbally during this calendar year, and at the end of this year, as we enter into 2022, that must be on a written or an electronic form. The safe containment and shipping. So what are the regulatory requirements around that? The vehicles must be able to withstand abrasion and corrosion. The vehicles must be leak proof and must prevent falling or blowing materials and prevent emissions of odors. The best practices around that is really around limiting nuisances, keeping your vehicles clean and free of mud and debris that may be tracked onto public roadways, and ensuring that the tarps and the gates, the locking portions, are in good working order to prevent dust or spills and leaks of soil material during transport. The best practices around the loading. It's fairly simple, and it's usually most of the things are already being done in our industry, but it's good to be reminded of that. Keeping your trailer and boxes clean. For the hauler themselves to conduct a visual inspection of the load. Don't add or use materials that would contaminate the soil between the project area and the deposit site. Ensuring the tarps and gates are secure. Ensure that every load is evenly distributed, and follow site instructions either at the project area or at the deposit site. Haul routes between the project area, reuse or disposal sites, or temporary soil sites should consider municipal trucking routes, local load restrictions and seasonal load limits, particularly those when frost comes out of the ground during the period of March to May, avoiding residential streets and areas around schools, hospitals, etc. Attempt to reduce and avoid traffic congestion, and where possible, using routes that take the shortest or the fastest available route to minimize greenhouse gas emissions. Other best practices during the delivery is avoid queuing on public roadways, limit your idle time, and avoid tailgate banging. Other activities, confirm the specific location where the soil is to be deposited and where the deposit site requires you to unload the soil itself. Comply with all site and safety controls, including traffic flow, speeds on site at the deposit site. Remain with the trucks while unloading. Check trailer boxes before lowering for any leftover material and cleanliness. Use wheel washing facilities when leaving the site to avoid mud tracking, contamination leaving the site. Only where feasible and for facilities are provided, but ensuring that you're going over mud mats too when they're constructed to ensure that any loose debris is removed from the tires, etc. And ensuring that your trailers are cleaned out after they're deposited for every load to avoid any cross-contamination for loads. Dumping at a site that's unauthorized by the project leader is illegal and subject to fines and penalties. Reducing your costs and greenhouse gas emissions. Which of the following practices will improve your fuel efficiency? Letting your vehicle warm up, 3 to 5 minutes, or in cold temperatures, 7 to 10 minutes. Don't rev the engine and let it warming up gradually. Always use the clutch, turning off your engine when you're stopped, using cruise control where appropriate, and changing gears smoothly during transfer. The answer is all of them. Additional ways to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and save money on your fuel is that there are more fuel efficiency practices, such as ensuring oil and your air tire pressure are in the normal operating ranges during startup and turning off the retarder when you don't need it. Also using a GPS to find the best routes to reduce the distance traveled, while also reducing the amount of travel time and considering traffic, and consider integrating a tracking system within the service. Verbal details that we mentioned on the hauling record that's applicable during this calendar year. The hauler is responsible to be able to answer the following questions: location at where the excess soil was loaded, the date and time it was loaded, the quantity of the excess soil in your load, name of an individual who may be contacted to respond to any inquiries about the load, including the quality of it. Information around the name, corporation, partnership, or firm that transports the excess soil, the name of the driver, name, and the license plates issued under the Highway Traffic Act. I also need to be able to answer where the location is that the excess soil is going to be deposited. That's a lot to remember, and some of those details may change for that driver from day to day. But due to the nature of the required information, it is recommended that not waiting until January 1st of 2022, but start using either printed or electronic forms to be able to answer those questions and have that information readily available. However, beginning January 1st of 2022, that'll add information plus some additional details must be on either paper or electronic information to accompany each load. Again, much of the same information: the location where the excess soil was generated, date and time it was loaded, the quantity of excess soil in the load, person that can be contacted about inquiries about the quality, and with more information about the soil. Again, the firm, the driver, license plate number, and where that soil is going. Information that will be on the hauling record that will be supplied at the deposit site is the date and time the load was deposited. Name and phone number of the individual at the site. So it could be a Class 1 soil management site, a Class 2, a beneficial reuse site, local waste transfer facility, or even landfill sites. The name of information, name and number of the person who's signing off on that acceptance of that information. And the declaration by that person stating he or she acknowledges the deposit of that exfil at that site. We talked about differences about paper and electronic versus the verbal. But once we get into that, paper, there's some pros and cons of using a paper management system. Pros would be no special technology is required, no energy or power needed to require or to keep that information. And it's generally easy to use, and it's been the tried and true method. Things that aren't so good about the paper system is that these tickets and papers are easy to lose. There's administrative costs around filing, scanning, record keeping, and sometimes legibility of the writing on that form can become an issue. The electronic system has some pros as well. You can integrate information sharing to reduce administration costs very easily. Referencing to that information is easy to look up and reference, and it reduces the need for a specific filing because it's done automatically. Cons of the electronic system, as we get used to that, maybe the required additional training that may come around that. And then for sites, project areas, and companies that have many subcontractors, it may be difficult to get all of them on the same system. Though it's not required, it is recommended that hauling management companies start to embrace the use of electronic system. As part of ONEIA's requested information to be generated is a hauling record template. We've drafted templates that are now free for use. These may be helpful references to ensure that you have the information required on your existing bill of ladings, or as you get new things created, you can get bill of ladings that will include the hauling record information. On our website, we've developed versions that are in Word, Excel, and a record form that could be used for multiple sites. They can be downloaded and customized, and they're available on our ONEIA's website. Great things and a case study that was provided to us around electronic records and the electronic systems, tracking systems. Provides instant hauling record uploads, live and real-time tracking, road optimization, which could lead to time savings, reduce fuel costs, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It simplifies administrative and filing processes and reduces management of paper records and storage, as we mentioned earlier. This could save time in reducing errors such as lost tickets. My understanding is that the electronic tracking system suppliers, the people that have those systems, have now adopted the hauling record requirements in their systems and should be able to be implemented so that that information is already there. How long does haulers, project leaders, and deposit sites need to keep the hauling records under the regulation? You have 4 options. I don't have to keep it. It's all responsibility of the project leader. For 2 years, for 10 years, or forever. The answer is 2 years. Hauling records are required for 2 years from the date of delivery. Other records generated that are outside of the hauling is for 7 years. Best practices around record keeping for hauling of excess soil. Keeping daily summaries of all loads. Provide a weekly summary of loads to the project areas, including any loads that were rejected. Consider using a GPS or electronic tracking system or record system. Consider keeping the documents for longer than the required 7 years for excess soil management or for the 2 years around the hauling records. Rejected loads. When loads are rejected, there needs to be a responsibility by the project leader for selecting an alternative final deposit site. Project leaders are required to have a contingency plan. And if they're requiring to file a notice under Section 8 on the excess soil registry, that contingency plan must be identified and documented, which identifies contingency measures to be implemented in the event that the excess soil cannot be deposited at the site identified. If none of that can be rerouted to an appropriate additional site, the excess soil should be immediately returned to the project area. So when excess soil has been rejected, the deposit site and the hauler should contact the project leader at the project area when the load is rejected. The project leader should inform the project area QP when the load has been rejected. And where possible, efforts should be made to directly deliver a rejected load to another local deposit site or disposal site to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from hauling and to minimize the number of times that soil is handled. To ensure that that happens and is smooth, language in the contracts around the hauling of soil should outline fair cost recovery for the haulers when the load is rejected. Liquid soil. Liquid soil we've talked about very briefly. But liquid soil is soil that has a slump of greater than 150 millimeters or 6 inches, as defined during a standard slump test that is outlined in Schedule 9 of Reg 347, or usually can be done for the same type of process that's done for concrete testing. Regulation applies to any project that involves excavation of soil and liquid soil or sediment from a surface water body or stormwater management. Regular requirements around a hauling of liquid soil, is that vehicles must have a valve system. Valves have to be locked when the operator is not with the vehicle. The vehicle operator must be present during unloading, and all stops must be tracked on a hauling record. And ONEIA has created a multi-site hauling record. The best practices around a hauling liquid soil is to track all stops if you're using multiple sites in your load and using the multiple load hauling record. For sites that are higher risk of potential contamination, using a risk-based analysis of what the potential for contamination should be used. Around that, segregating possibly contaminated soil from other clean sources would be perhaps a best practice, and ensure that if you think there may be contamination, then not add more clean soil to that load. For multiple site loads, there's obviously challenges around that, ensuring the quality of that soil, but it's still the responsibility of the project leader or the excess soil site to select the final deposit site of their soil that they generate. Sites that are generally small and you may be compacting loads or consolidating multiple site loads may not be aware of all the regulatory obligations. So that's very important that the haulers are aware of it and could assist in educating the generator of their responsibilities and may support them in selecting where the appropriate soil deposit site may be. For multiple site loads, consideration should be made to ensuring that the soil goes to a facility that may be licensed with an ECA. And that ensures the proper management and testing of that soil rather than going directly to a deposit site where the soil quality can't be. Responsibilities of hauling management company, and demonstrating due diligence and ensuring the health and safety of their employees. Hauling companies should consider adopting the following best practices in their training and communications. One is to provide the proper training on the regulatory requirements, to ensure that their employees and contractor operators can communicate and updates to the regulation in a timely manner, provide opportunities to review the regulation as needed. Ensure that your drivers know how to follow and properly fill out the hauling record and the requirements that go around that. Ensure the information they collect includes the required information under the regulation and integrate as soon as possible, highlighting the legal requirements. For project leaders, best practices are ensuring that you're hiring reputable hauling companies. Consult with the haulers where appropriate on larger sites and larger activities so that all aspects of the material movement can be considered. Assist in informing the haulers on any route restrictions that you may be aware of. Consider using real-time load tracking. Create traffic and transportation plans for both the site and between sites. And conduct an audit of your hauling process. At the deposit site, best practices around the hauling of soil is making sure you've got clear signage that's easily seen and be able to be read by your transporters. Keep your site well maintained. Have clear communication around the traffic flow and controls on your site. Screen loads prior to unloading them. Communicate rejected loads to the project area, the hauler, and have a good traffic and transportation plan. Traffic and transportation management plans should include location and configuration of your site entrances, limiting truck queuing and parking on public roadways. Where feasible, integrate dust control and mud tracking, prevention and truck cleaning, limiting noise related to truck traffic. Where feasible, configure the site to use existing physical barriers such as buildings, fences, piles that act as sound barriers. Having good hauling routes between sites and on your sites. And when you're preparing the traffic and management plan, those managing the excess soil should consult with the different municipality levels regarding appropriate transportation routes between sites. And that's many of the things that we've identified on our best practices documents. We've developed some on-demand training modules. They're also on our ONEIA's website at Excess Soil. And we have developed these using a Prezi platform, which is very nice. It's interactive. You can navigate the training at your own pace. And within the haulers best practices, we've developed 3 smaller on-demand training Prezis, one for haulers, one for project leader considerations in hauling, and one for deposit sites. And those can be, they are now available and can be accessed for anybody that needs to do training for their staff or just for a general interest around the hauling of excess soil. A lot of this work could not have been done without the dedicated contributions of our steering committee. Most of all, our ONEIA working group leads, Helen Greenwood and JP Marini, who assisted us in getting these training documents and these best practices prepared. We have volunteers such as Michael Collins at Waste Management, Dan Jackson at DJ at Jackson Hauling, Malcolm Robertson of Ontario Excavac, Arvin Mulhey from Joseph Hall, Richard Nelson from Badger Daylighting, Bob Punia from Ontario Dump Truck Association, Brian Moniz from PATH, GFL, Francine Kelly Hooper at Stantec, Denise Lachine at Golder, Al Duran from RCCAO, Kevin Goldberg, Mark Paquette, and Burr Singh from our soil tracking software providers, and Aroni McCutcheon from the MTO, and not to mention Laura Belize from MECP, who was a very big part of getting these best practices developed. Janelle, would you like to wrap it up and talk about our training?
Sure, yeah. Actually, I've put some links as well into the chat so that you can easily click through to everything. Next Thursday, we're doing the temporary sites best practices training. And so you can RSVP from that from our website, ONEIA.ca. Same with the qualified persons as well. So both of those are free sessions. We will be recording them as well and making them available. So you can RSVP, and even if you can't attend, get the recording after. So yeah. Yeah, we're here at the office. If you need to reach out, I'm at info@oneia.ca. If you have any questions about the training or having issues accessing any of the best practice documents, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to connect and make sure people can access all the great work that's been done here. And yeah, if you're interested in becoming an ONEIA member or learning more, also reach out to me and happy to chat about opportunities for that.
So thanks very much, Grant, for doing that today. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Grant, I don't know if you have any words to sum up.
Time for questions. We have a few. I know there's probably a hard stop for 1 o'clock. I know some of our attendees are also joining the Weir Folds presentation. That'll be starting at 1. I know that both Krista and Jeanette are attending ours today, and we'll probably need to drop off, but I have a couple minutes for questions if there are any.
Question from Christian. Are there any apps for haulers to use to track their soil information?
It's a good question. As I mentioned earlier, my understanding is that the soil tracking softwares have been developed. Examples would be Soil Flow, Tread, or TraceNet, have incorporated the hauling record portions within their tracking software. So it's part of their full service that they're developing and making sure that any record keeping around the movement of soil is easily done and can be at real time. So hopefully that helps. Just want to reiterate while we're maybe waiting for a question or two that please go to the tools that we have posted on the website and look at those. We'd certainly welcome questions after the fact that can be filed through Janelle, that we can address those to you directly if needed after the fact. But again, hopefully these tools will be helpful to everybody. And the temporary sites will be next week, and the excess soil management for QPs will be on the 28th. And they will be very similar in terms of presentation today. We also have the training Prezi platform opportunities there as well for both of those. So please don't hesitate to visit any of those and find, hopefully you'll find these documents and tools useful to you.
Another question, Grant. Do you recommend training of all truck drivers?
Well, if you're not hauling excess soil, you probably don't need to know. But if you're hauling excess soil, yes. Hopefully the companies that are out there will be adopting the best practices and ensuring that their drivers are fully aware of the requirements of the regulation and the rules around the hauling of excess soil. Because as of January 1st of next year, they need to be able to produce a hauling record for each load that goes on. And I know that a lot of the records are very, very similar, and it's already being done for the bill of ladings. However, the hauler does have a distinct responsibility in being able to produce that and ensure that all the requirements of that are being met. So yes, I do recommend that haulers of excess soil be trained up, or people that may be hauling gravel and waste soil, those types of things, and maybe doing excess soil at the same time. They should understand that. If you're hauling computer goods or groceries and so forth, you probably don't need to know all the requirements.
Are there any budget estimations for the additional trucking management? And are there fines or penalties if you don't maintain proper records? How about the first one? Budget estimates for additional management of trucking?
Yeah, that's outside of our scope. I'm not sure that there would be a lot of it, other than maybe making sure that you get your staff trained. But I think that there's a lot of training that goes on already to make sure that they're complying with the MTO requirements and so forth. And you know, once you get your systems, if it's an electronic system, aside from the capital cost to get on that system and maintain it, I believe there's probably a site license fee, but beyond that, I don't expect there would be much in terms of cost. It's more of a time thing and ensuring that all the requirements are made. In terms of the question around if there's fines and penalties, those have not yet been defined, but I know that the Ministry of Environment is looking at a various system of administrative monetary penalties, and also through a license plate seizure that could be done at the spot if you were found to not be complying with the excess soil regulation.
Question from Christine. Does the project leader and hauler need the tracking software?
You need to be able to track your material. You have to demonstrate that you have a system in place that you track your soil. It doesn't necessarily have to be an electronic platform, but you should be able to demonstrate and be able to identify where your soil has gone at any given time. So the regulation doesn't specify that it has to be a tracking software. You have to have a system in place. However, we've all seen how easily things can be done when an appropriately managed and developed software package can be implemented. So it's usually on the project leader who has the tracking software, because ultimately they're responsible for ensuring that their soil has been managed appropriately. The hauler would probably need to ensure that they are able to provide GPS information, live tracking, and so forth. But again, it's not a requirement within the regulation that it has to be a software thing. But I think that my friends at Soil Flow, TraceNet, and Tread would argue that it should be.
Okay, what happens if the software packages are not the same? Do they mesh with each other?
That's a good question, and I can't answer that, unfortunately. I don't think they do, because I think they're probably built on different platforms. I think the information may be able to be dumped between them, but I don't think they mesh specifically.
Do you expect any enforcement between Jan 1st and next year, or more education for the ministry?
I'm not sure that there would be a heavy hand between in the next year. I know that the ministry is probably not in the business of creating problems for people. However, if it's administrative issues during this next year around that, I think it would probably go to more of the education as you identified. But I think it's case by case. Could be assessed. Enforcement issues. I think it's like anything else. You can attract more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. So I think that honest mistakes and educational issues could be overlooked. But that could be just on hauling record. If you're dumping soil illegally, I think there would be enforcement.
Great. And I think that might have been a question that came in through email from Janelle. How would a municipality know if the hauler has properly trained their truckers?
It's a good question. I would like to think that any training that you do, much like MTO requirements, health and safety requirements, and so forth, are recorded. So you could ask your hauling company whether their drivers have been properly trained and so forth. So again, that becomes a management thing, becomes a due diligence thing, and being able to demonstrate that your training has been delivered and that those people have got it. I would like to think that there's also going to be opportunities for refreshers. So once a year, much like anything else that you do, through your training operations for your companies, that it would be done at that time as well.
So some words of wrap up, Grant.
Yeah, again, really appreciate the efforts of my friends who were on the steering committee. A lot of time and effort was put in by those people during this past year when we were dealing with a lot of other difficult things. Gathering this group of people together was often easier because of the electronic opportunities that we have, but also, sometimes has its drawbacks. But all those people generously supported our efforts and provided their volunteer time and efforts in developing this project together in this product. So we really do thank them for their hard work and input, and they gave to us without hesitation. Again, the best practice documents are on our website. The Prezi trainings are on our website. Please access those. They will be updated in the next week or two based on the minor changes that the regulation took just before Christmas. We're just going through those now. It will be updated, but that information will be there for the next 5 years to be accessed. So hopefully it's useful to everybody. Again, it was developed by the industry for the industry.
Great. Thank you. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. We're back here again next week. And as we pointed out, we'll have one a week for the next 2 weeks. Thanks again, Grant, for taking the time today, and the other members of the committee for developing the piece. And we look forward to seeing more people at the next piece. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.